Hey folks, you're listening to the Driving After Dark podcast. I'm an 8-year driver with tens of thousands of rides who drives exclusively overnight in Denver, Colorado, mostly. And one of the most common questions I get is, what's your craziest ride? Well, the truth is, that's a huge ask. I mean, I've probably had over 60,000 people in my car. And which genre? Dark? Scary? Funny? Sexy? Rude? Are you looking for something that'll make you think or make you chuckle? Are you trying to get grossed out? And my best ride? Forget about it. That's impossible. Mostly because it's always the crazy stuff that sticks out. So this podcast pretty much answers this and just about every other question we usually get from passengers, or packs as we call them. I'm your host, Julian Ray. Thanks for stopping by. Let's get into this. Welcome to the first episode of Driving After Dark. Again, my name is Julian Ray. Thanks for tuning in. Since this is our first episode, I want to kind of start by covering who I am and what I do and how and why I started driving, and then kind of close out with a story about a really weird ride from way back when I first started driving. I mean, in general, but we'll kind of cover all sorts of stuff here, from the crazy passenger stories to the couple fights, to pukers, to celebrity rides, to impossible coincidences, which happen more often than you'd think, and even answer some of your questions about kind of what it's like to do what we do, like what we make, what we hate, and what really goes on behind the scenes with the gig apps like Lyft or Uber or DoorDash or whatever. I mean, not all the drivers are going to have the same opinion, so when I'm talking about driver-specific stuff, just know that there are always going to be drivers who think otherwise, and markets or cities, rather, where things might be a little different for drivers. This podcast is definitely meant for grown-ups, and it will have cursing. Honestly, cursing is pretty fucking common in Lyft rides among adults. And in general, we will be covering adult themes, so just be warned. That could include dark subject matter, sexual themes, and yeah, even death, I guess. You drive overnight for long enough, you totally come across that too. But trust me, it's not all dark, I promise. The stories you pick up over the years are all over the place, and the vast majority of rides and riders that we get are actually pretty great. I can't count the number of heart-to-heart or breakthrough conversations I've had in my car. So me, I exclusively drive overnight. You know, why I do that, a question I get a lot when I'm driving, has a lot to do with just my normal neurological natural sleep cycle, which I learned to kind of lean into years ago. We can save that for some other podcast, because there are lots of stories surrounding that. But yeah, you know, so I'm an overnight driver because I'm an overnight person. Long story short, and I have been doing that for about this is my 8th year now. About 26,000 rides in as of this recording, and I pretty much drive in Denver. I do sometimes drive in Phoenix and Albuquerque and other nearby cities, mostly because of something else that I do, but that's something we can actually get into a little bit later, really. So how I got into this in the first place. So in the beginning, I actually owned a company. I owned a business that fixed websites. So we were all developers, you know. And this was my first company of that size. I had never run anything that big. We had maybe 100 employees within that 5-year period that we were open. And you know, I'm professionally, I'm a musician, you know, by trade. And that's at my heart. That's really what I do and what I've been doing for the past 27 years now. So I am, you know, I do enjoy starting businesses, and I enjoy the process of building and creating business ideas and structures, but being trying to be Mr. CEO was burning me out, actually, and it was a lot of hard lessons, one after the other. I was so stressed out that, we're talking, my phone would make a noise, and my stomach would do flip-flops. Like, that was just like my life at that point. I was overwhelmed by the sheer amount of responsibility, the sheer numbers I was seeing coming in, with money. I was paying more in rent for the office that we were in, towards the end, than I had really typically seen in a month before owning the business. And the whole thing was started with just like a few $100. It was bootstrapped, just kind of rolled over until the very end. So I was just wiped out, and everything was a wreck. But I kept rolling with it. I kept learning as I went. I kept faking it until I made it, which was sometimes a little transparent to my employees and clients, I'm sure. But I was still very much out of my element. I was just out of water, a fish out of water in that case. So I kind of, I at some point got into Lyft as a passenger, and it just really kind of drew me in, specifically Lyft in this case. Before all this, I'd been a couch surfing host and surfer even for the last 17 years, and I've been part of that community for a long time. And so I've always been a big fan of those types of models, and that's kind of what it was at the beginning there. So one of my first Lyft rides, I remember that I actually I got a driver who was also a musician, and he said that he had just gotten off of tour with Rob Thomas. And so I made some joke about, kind of did my best Rob Thomas impression, which I'm not going to do for you here. And I think he said something like, oh yeah, Rob was actually really, really kind to me, and he, really helped my career quite a bit, So he sat there in awkwardness for a minute. As I tried to dig myself out of that, no, I don't. I was just, I just kind of like to make fun of. I'm just kind of like that, It's not. So how long were you on tour? So we ended up going to the grocery store, which is where I was headed. But at that time, Lyft didn't go past a certain boundary in Denver, past a street called Colorado. So, we were just past that boundary, and that would mean that I would have to get a taxi back, if you recall those things there. But I couldn't get a Lyft back to my house from there. So he said that he would just wait for me, because at that time, the early drivers, the first 50, they were all paid hourly on top of everything else. So he was just going to wait for me, and I said, well, why? Just come inside. Do you have some shopping to do? So he said he did, and we both went inside and we went grocery shopping. We talked about his music career and him going to Nashville, which he eventually did, because we became friends afterwards. And how he was currently an optometrist or ophthalmologist, and that was kind of an early Lyft ride for me, and that's kind of how it used to be. That wasn't super unusual or uncommon at that time. It was really clear that you were dealing with someone from the community in their car, taking you somewhere. It was a whole thing, and it really attracted folks who were open to that kind of idea. But I ended up taking Lyft a lot. It just became my mode of transportation, because I didn't have a car at the time. And I'm talking, I was spending like $1,000 a month sometimes, and I was hearing from drivers that they had heard about me from other drivers because I was that common a passenger for people. At one point, I was listed as a find in a scavenger hunt that Lyft had organized with local drivers, and I had people taking pictures and sending them in to the groups. The group that I now run, actually, the previous version of that group. But so I was kind of involved as a passenger, really, and I kept telling myself, as I made friends with these drivers, that I would, when I got a car, I would pull my weight, because it seemed like a really cool thing, a really fun thing to do. And, at some point I got a car and did just that. I signed up. And for, I would say about a year, the last year the company was around, I was literally I was closing up shop, turning out the lights, turning on the alarm, hopping in my car in the parking lot, pulling out my mustache, for the dashboard. And yeah, turning on the app and then doing that for a few hours before going home. It was kind of like my stress release gig, really. It kind of put me back in a place where I felt more like myself, because I certainly didn't running the company. And, I could kind of oscillate back into a place that I was much more comfortable interacting with people. I love to drive, so there was that. And, it was a great way to kind of get back to myself. And when I closed the company, I started driving full time and began having to learn strategy, basically, to do that, to make that work. So, and I've been doing that ever since. At this point, we're in the 8th year, so it's been about 7.5, I would say. When drivers first started back when I picked this up, we had mentors. There's a whole different process that happened then. It was a much smaller community and a much smaller company, really. And so we would have this mentor that sat with us and explained how the community was and how it worked, and checked our cars, and did a whole inspection, and literally just kind of sat and rolled around with us a little bit and felt out our personalities too. The first 50 drivers, the ones that came before me, they were interviewed actually from the very beginning, but the phase I entered, that's how we started. But yeah, you would kind of get vetted and checked and onboarded like that, and they would take that picture with the green leafy background that I still have. So that was the beginning. Nowadays it doesn't quite work that way. Nowadays it's pretty much onboarding free. You just kind of get approved, and then you're just on the road, and that's about it. So that actually brings us to our first saucy tale, really. So as I mentioned earlier, I am an overnight driver. I do tend to drive well into the early morning, as in like 4 or 5 a.m. Typically 4 or 5 a.m. is kind of either my cutoff time, or if I'm not working, my bedtime. So I'm like, at this point, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 months into driving, if that, actually. And I'm at a point where, because driving endurance is something that you build over time. Like I've always loved driving, but there wasn't a point in my life where I'd been driving 6 hours. Like it just wasn't a thing that you did before that. So this is a point in my driving experience or history where 6 hours would burn me out. So I was coming up on about 6 hours. I was I was towards what I considered the end of my night. I was just going to take one more ride and then head back home. I was down south. I was down near a place here called Littleton. It's a suburb to the south of Denver proper, and I don't know, maybe 20-ish minutes away. And I figured I would just take one more ride and then head out. So you're often in a situation where you don't necessarily know how intense that ride is going to be until you are there, and then if you want to cancel it, you kind of have to do it, a little bit to their face, and that can be awkward. So when I showed up and hit arrive, it turns out that we were going to a different city to the north of Denver, called Greeley, which was from Littleton was going to be, I seem to recall, like roughly an hour and 15, hour and a half, something like that. It was definitely over an hour. Let's just say an hour and a half, and that was going to be a long ass ride with this particular passenger. So I was a little stressed about that. So I'm down in Littleton, and I'm picking up one last ride, and I And I look off to my left, and I'm picking up some guy apparently, and it's actually these two boys are holding this girl in between them, and she is she's not passed out, but they are certainly helping her to the car, and that's and this is a situation that we often say, this is when it's your turn. This is when it's now on you to sort of take care of somebody or to help somebody through a rough time or a rough night. This was one of the first times where it was my turn. And they take her to the car, they kind of like load her into the front seat, and the guy whose ride it is, who ordered the ride for her, he apologizes immediately. He's like, yeah, I'm sorry, bro, I hope it's cool. Which is never a good way to start, honestly. And she's just like, man, I can't explain how she is. She's like histrionic kind of, or just very panicky. She's like, the first thing she does is ask if she can smoke a cigarette, and I allow it because I can clearly see that she's on one. But this time she lights up a cigarette and she rolls down the window, and because I don't smoke, and so I'm trying to read her. I'm trying to figure out what it is that she is on, because she's clearly on something, and I can't quite piece together what it is. And meanwhile, she's like in this state where she is like she's like, oh my God, I don't know you. You're a stranger. I don't know who you are. Oh my God. And so I'm trying to calm her down a little bit. And I figured that it might help if I knew what she was on, because in the end, we are going a long distance. I've been a musician all of my adult life, and as a musician in the indie folk, indie rock space, clearly that means I know my drugs. Now these days I pretty much only drink seltzer, and that's about it. At 44, but of course in my 20s and 30s I obviously ran through stuff. So I figured that if I knew what she was on, I could babysit her better. Like if she, but I couldn't figure out what it was. It was way too. Like it was too all over the place for acid. It really was like it wasn't coke. It was too intense for that, and too again unfocused. I don't know what PCP looks like. I figured it couldn't be mushrooms, because like that would be a really weird trip. Like I just couldn't place it. Like nothing really fit, And she and so I figured I would ask her, what she was on. So I could help. The problem with that is that in my head I'm still like this hippie curly haired guitar player dude, right? This like skinny young dude. And so I thought that I said to her, oh yeah, so like, hey, like I know all the drugs, so I'm like really really cool with it. So if you just what do you like on, like you in real life? I'm sure I look more like a cop every day. So. What I really probably asked was, ma'am, are you on drugs right now? Ma'am, I need to see some identification. Do you have parents? Where are your parents? I'm sure that I sounded like that. So long story short, she freaked out even more. And we're on the road. We're on the highway at this point. So I'm sort of wondering now, like, what's going to happen? Like, what I'm going to do here? Because I'm clearly not going to kick her out. I'm not trying to, she hasn't got to the point where I need to like call the cops or anything like that. I'm not trying to see her in trouble. But I am concerned about like, where she's going to go. Like, is she going to open the door as we're on the highway and roll out? Like, where is she going to take this? And again, since I can't identify where her headspace is, I'm kind of lost as to what to do. And so, I'm trying to give her some options. I'm saying, hey, because she's really focused on not knowing me. So I'm like, hey, if you need to call a taxi, I can wait with you until the taxi gets there. You don't have to take his ride, the ride that he bought for you. You have options here. And she didn't want to do that. And so I'm trying to like personalize myself and, tell her who I am and talk about, what I do and my family and stuff. And that's not working. And at some point she asked me for an aux cable. No, the truth is, at this point, I was only like, 5-6 months in. And I had already gotten to the point where I was over the aux cable thing. In the beginning, I had snacks, and I would, I was sort of like allowing everyone to completely just DJ my car. But, after a while, it just kind of became something where when I drive, I listen to the music I like to listen to. And the truth is that when you're in the car, we're probably interacting anyway. So I also kind of know, and most of us know, that if you hand your aux cable over, it's gonna usually be some of the worst music you're ever gonna hear in your life. So, and then I have to wash my ears out after with my own stuff. So usually the answer is a hard no. But in her case, I just kind of popped it out, and I'm like, hey, just whatever you need, take it. Because I mean, really, it's how bad could it be? So she plugs her phone in and it starts DJing her life, basically, and it calms her down, which is nice. It's like acoustic, gothy songwriter stuff, which is fun. And so she's she's playing a song, and she's like, oh, this is the first concert I went to, and this is my friend's band, and she's clearly still sort of like breathing herself out of whatever state that was. It's just a little panicky still, but sort of talking through it. And then eventually she just chills. So I end up doing more listening, to her for most of the rest of that ride, and just kind of grateful that she's more in a normal space. So so it turns out that she was actually on a mixture of things. She had apparently done her first bump of coke, if I'm not mistaken, earlier in the night, and then did mushrooms right after that, and did a few more bumps along the way, and then the mushrooms kicked in. And so she was in kind of a variety of headspaces, both of which were new to her because she had never done either before. And I'm sort of sitting there thinking, like, I mean, who the fuck are you? Are you Dean Ween? Like, who mixes it? Mushrooms and coke? Such a weird thing. But that's something 18-year-olds do. So she was coming down from that, and it kind of made more sense. She was in a mixed space and in a new space in both cases. And so finally we get to Greeley, but we finally get to her house. She gets out, she gives me a hug, and we're buds now, and then she, hops inside. And it all kind of makes sense because, this is early, not just in my Lyft driving career, but this is when Lyft wasn't even available in most small cities, and was generally new. So the thing that we're so used to now, like hopping into cars with strangers, if you believe in strangers, it wasn't as common at the time, and so it was, it made sense. She was kind of stuck on that, but in the end it worked out, and thankfully she was fine, and I drove back the long road back to Denver. Thankfully, on the way I got another ride to the airport, so that was my last effective ride. Thankfully, also, it was a very normal lady, just going to the airport, like a mom kind of character, like very, very mom energy. And one of the first things she said when she got in the car was, oh, don't worry, baby, I'm just going to the airport. It's all good. It's going to be an easy ride for you. And I'm just sort of like, oh my God, thank you. Thank you. You're a normal person. I appreciate that. So these kind of things do happen. I mean, they are not the most common ride, but as I said before, sometimes it's just your turn, and I have a number of just my turn kind of rides, and when you come across them, you groan inwardly, but it's that's somebody's got to be there and take care of that. So this time it's you, and that's just kind of how it works out sometimes. I mean, over the years, I've had to, scoop some guy off the sidewalk. I've had to, or pick up drunk passengers who had fallen behind my wheel, under my car, wake people up, or call their girlfriends and have them wake them up. In that case, take people to the hospital, sit with somebody for nearly an hour and a half because she could not remember where she lived. And that's a different story for a different episode. But yeah, this is something that happens from time to time. And, it was, like I said, my first and pretty early in my career. So it kind of set me up for the next, for the next 7.5 years there. So that's going to do it for us tonight, I think. I'm I'm Julian Ray. Thanks for tuning in. This is going to be a weekly thing, and hopefully we'll see you next week, where we'll be talking about, let's go ahead and just call it now, shall we? We'll talk about something dark, something dangerous, something gross, and something sexy. How about that? Once again, thanks a lot for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.